political world.
This meeting of the Sacramento Metropolitan Cable Television Commission is being videotaped in its entirety and will be cablecast without interruption on Metro Cable 14, the Government Affairs channel on the Sacramento cable system. Today's meeting is being cablecast live and will be repeated Saturday at 9 a.m. Members of the audience wishing to address the Commission should fill out a speaker ID form located at the back table and give it to the Secretary right here. Please just walk up and hand it to her. Please speak into the microphone when addressing the Commission and state your name for the record. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Roby? Here. Strang?
Here.
Cerna? Castanis?
Here.
Fletcher?
Here.
Grantland Johnson? Toby Johnson?
Here.
Collin?
There is a quorum present. We're going to take the liberty of asking our Executive Director, Rich Esposito, to make a brief report on some of the events of Congress and give us the latest that has occurred. Rich, it's all yours.
Good afternoon. Senate Bill 12, the cable bill, is on the President's desk. Got there last week after being passed out of the Senate with a margin large enough to sustain or to override a veto. The President must decide or must act by midnight Saturday on this bill. It right now is too close to call. From all sources, from contacts this morning in Washington, there are 2 votes either way. So the scenario could include a veto with an unsuccessful override, a veto with a successful override, a veto with Congress adjourning, or the distinctly remote possibility of the President signing the bill if it turned out that an override was obvious. I'd like to brief you on 5 key points in this bill very quickly. This is the bill we've been working on for several years. The first issue is damages immunity. The language contained in S12 is the language that we wanted in 1974. It's the language we paid $60,000 lobbying with Miller and Young at that time to have included in the bill. Had this language been in the existing law, we wouldn't have been sued in the Pac West suit. The damages immunity language by itself is enough for Sacramento to support this bill. The customer service language reaffirms what we always believed, that we had the right and authority to implement customer service regulations at times other than renewal. The rate regulation provisions are very weak. They started out weak to begin with. They were watered down as the process continued. We will have the ability, through a very cumbersome administrative process, after the FCC adopts regulations, we then adopt regulations. We then petition the FCC with a written statement that we're competent to implement the regulations. We can then regulate what in our terms would be a cut-down limited basic tier. So the rate regulation provisions are weak at best. There are 2 other things that will have some impact on us. One, the bill limits the prohibition on buy-through. That is, subscribers, if this bill takes effect, which is scheduled for 60 days from signature, would only have to take limited basic in order to have access to premiums or pay-per-view. Right now, it takes the full basic service at $22 before you could have access to premium services or pay-per-view events. The last rate regulation aspect is that there is a statement of putting reasonableness limits on the company's downgrade fees for changing premium services. Right now, Sac Cable charges $5. The FCC will set some rules and regulations on whether clicking the computer to downgrade a service is worth a $5 fee. The next area is uniform rates. The cable bill has basically our language on uniform rates throughout the geographic or franchise area. This means that we could possibly remove that language from our ordinance and look at maybe at insulating ourselves even better from further litigation. I look to having a paper from Brent and myself on that in the future once we see what happens with the bill. And the last provision that I think is interesting has to do with program diversity and least channel access. Currently, Sacramento Cable in all systems must make a certain number of channels available for outside programmers to come buy a channel, buy space on a channel. And the number of channels which has to be available in that regard is dependent on the total number of channels the system has. In Sacramento's case, I believe it would be 4. The current law left to the cable operator the decision to set the fees. So the cable operator could set the fee on the use of least access channel. And so cable operators throughout the country said, glad to have you use our channel. It's cost you $1 million a minute. Therefore, there's been no least access, no outsiders coming onto the cable system under the existing Cable Act. if S12 is approved, if it gets through, the FCC will set reasonable rates for least access cable channels. And that has the possibility to allow local commercial or whatever type of access to the cable system, which heretofore hasn't been allowed. That's a summary of S12. The President has to veto it or make a decision by midnight Saturday. It's apt to go for an override on Sunday or Monday right before Congress adjourns. As of today, there's been no override of a presidential veto. This one is very, very close, plus or minus 2 votes, as near as I can tell from this morning. At the state level, I'm happy to report that a bill that the Chair and I worked on for 18 months was approved last night. AB 2388 puts into state law a good portion of our customer service regulations. This provides the foundation for other jurisdictions and backs our regulations with one more level of support. And I thank the Chair for his help, and I think plaudits go to Assemblywoman Gwen Moore, who worked this one through. I was surprised to see it pass or get signed. Next brief item on an overview is that Diane has done an outstanding, marvelous job in setting up the election forms and the schedules before you. Hope you enjoyed them. This is the most comprehensive package of election forms we've ever done, and I believe the most comprehensive package that the League has done in many, many years. And you can see the schedule. The replays will continue right up until Election Day. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Very good.
Any questions or comment from the commission members?
Was there any value placed on the other on the provisions of rate regulation? There are some other aspects of the bill of SB 12. Was there any? I mean, did they justify it in terms of it being a savings to the consumer? That's why it's a good bill. Because you said the actual dollar value aspects of it is rather weak and will not provide much relief.
It's gotten a lot of play, a lot of exposure that way, but I'm advising you that it isn't significant and that we should not create expectations on the part of subscribers that we're going to see a reduction of services or a lessening of the number of rate or price increases. The rate regulation portion is severely watered down.
So we shouldn't expect much to come from that aspect of it?
We shouldn't expect any change at all.
Any other? Well, thank you, Rich. Yes, Ron?
I didn't realize that this was going to be discussed, but I'd like to just make a brief comment, if I may, about the bill.
Well, we're not discussing the bill itself. He's just reporting on the action that occurred. It's not up for discussion at this moment. Thank you. I want to acknowledge having received 2 letters, one from Dentino, Powell, and DeGusti, related to topics important to them, dated October 1st, and a September 29 letter from Access Sacramento, the Sacramento Ed Cable Consortium, KVIE, KXPR, and the Religious Coalition. I wish to respond briefly as chairman by saying these have both come to us at the last moment. We have not been able to analyze and probably will not be able to incorporate any of their contents in today's discussions. They contain important messages. We will want to respond and to make use of the ideas for whatever goal may be most appropriate for us, but please don't expect us to make use of them today in the manner which you may have intended, because for one, I do not intend to speak on their contents without having a much more adequate opportunity to analyze them. I'm speaking for myself, but I'm also saying that the Commission does like to receive information far enough in the future of the date to be discussed so that we can analyze it. Members of the Commission, we need to adopt an agenda of operation for today. How do you wish to proceed? I put in item number 1A. It doesn't require any action, but it is a reminder of some of the concepts on which the proposed grant contract is based. We can refer to A through J as we discuss item B, or if you have any comments on item number 1A, this would be a time where we'd bring them forth. It's up to you.
I have a comment, Orville. We saw these, I think, for the first time at our meeting in, what, July, June? When did we see these? They were on the screen. Last month we saw them.
September.
And we indicated that we wanted the opportunity to discuss them. I don't know that we want to take action, but I think that staff should hear from us on each of the items individually. And I think that the people in the audience ought to be able to have a chance to comment about them as well, if they are indeed going to be concepts in our community programming contracts. So I don't mind going through A through J if that's what you wish. And regarding the two letters, Orville, it seems to me that this is an agenda item. We have advertised for item 1A to be community programming, and both these letters do address that issue, so it seems to me that it would be appropriate for these at least to hear from them. I don't know that we have to discuss them, but they should have the opportunity to.
All of the folks who are on the letter, the heads, are here to speak, representing the different organizations. I think we're going to have to allow a little bit more leeway in how we approach this afternoon's discussion. It's going to have to be a sort of round table with people not having to formally announce names and so on as they come forward beyond the first time. The purpose would be to keep it moving forward point by point. But if you have something to say and you've already spoken once, this would not prevent you from coming forward again to be terse and make your comment in a way that would move us forward.
In terms of an actual decision today, do you anticipate us adopting any resolutions or anything today, or?
There is one element where adoption is necessary, unless you find in the discussion that it's better to postpone action. That is the grant agreement. This has been composed by our legal authority, Mr. Blair, assisted by Rich and others, and it is the basic document that is proposed as the boilerplate that our executive officer would proceed in working with the grantees.
So I thought that would be one of the issues of the roundtable, and I think last time we said that we would want staff to work with the community, with the community groups, and come back with some agreement in terms of before we proceeded with any resolution. I thought that was the direction we gave staff last time.
Well, it was not. I reviewed the entire tape afterward. It was talked about, but direction was not given. This was the conclusion of Rich when he reviewed the tape and another member of his staff. However, that you cannot go forward. This is the dilemma. By delaying action on adopting the contract, then we are leaving it in limbo as to how to proceed.
Could we proceed as we did claims previously? On a month-to-month basis?
Well, we can do that, but the big question is, what do you want to accomplish today?
I think staff should hear from us in terms of the concepts A through J that are listed here. I think staff should get input from us. I thought that was why we were going to meet in a roundtable approach today. That's what I thought we would be doing.
Why don't we start out? Is there any member of the commission who wants to comment on item A under number 1A? Terms of the grant agreement can vary. Does that raise any issue?
You know, one little
Pull the mic up to you.
I'm sorry here. One quick thing, if it isn't too difficult, because I think there are a lot of people watching that sometimes it's difficult for them to see what we're doing. With each of these, would staff mind giving even maybe a few sentences of explanation on each one to focus the discussion? Is that difficult?
Not at all.
Yeah, wouldn't that be better? I think for people that are watching or in the audience, I think that's a good way. Let's just start with 1 through J and see how we go. We're going to have a little bit of trouble, I think, today, and that is the hour that we started so late that several of us have problems at 5. But let's try to go as quickly as we can. But if with each one, if you could just give it doesn't have to be lengthy. But read each one, and then so that people know what it is that we're talking about.
Want to read and talk or go through all A through J right now?
You want to do it that way, or you want to do them separately? I guess that's what I'm asking here.
Well,
In order to avoid confusion and finding that we may have to do some of this again, I'd prefer that we simply ask each one, I'll take A, terms of the grant agreement can vary. That's one of the concepts. Does that raise any clash or comment from anybody on the commission? Does it raise any comment that the audience wish to respond to?
And what I'm asking is for Rich to just couple
describe that.
sentences.
Right.
What?
Right. The draft grant agreement as proposed last month had several key concepts in it. One is that looking at the existing grant agreements in which one boilerplate was applied to every grantee, I feel there's room and need to negotiate some different definitions, different standards possibly, for different grantees, and that I'd like to have that flexibility in negotiating those grant agreements so that we are not tied to one boilerplate for everybody.
Okay, that's exactly what I'm after, Rich. Thank you very much.
All right, we've cleared A then, haven't we? B says compliance with Brown Act required to receive funds or channels. Any comment from commission members?
Yes.
Rich, you might say why.
I do not agree with B. I don't think it's necessary for the Brown Act to be applied to.
Do you mean, Rich, you mean this would be applied to the board members of each of the grantee organizations?
That's correct, in their formal meetings.
Did the governor sign the bill that requires this?
He did not. It was vetoed last night. Let me review. The Brown Act is the state legislation going back 25 or 30 years, which spells out how government entities conduct business. It's my belief that the grantees are quasi-government entities. Moreover, it's my belief that they should and must do their business in open session. There have been 2 examples where that has not occurred. If the grantees could, as an alternative, and they were all asked this, if they objected to the Brown Act, all the grantees except one said they either didn't have a problem with it or were already complying with it. So there's only one grantee who has voiced a point that this is a problem. I'd be happy to review proposals for alternative means of compliance for that grantee, but all I've heard so far is it's too hard and I don't want to. I think it's important that public business be conducted in public.
Okay.
Jan Tillman.
Well, we're that grantee, clearly, and I take exception to Rich's description of our response. John Hirschberger responded in writing. A copy of that letter went to each of you as commissioners. The letter certainly did not say it's too hard, we do not want to comply. The letter said that we are under so many governances as it is, as a public organization, that we are more than fulfilling the obligations that are the intent and spirit of the Brown Act. I think perhaps it may be best if we address that issue specifically with KVIE rather than taking the commission and the other grantees' time with it.
So you didn't raise any objection at this point to Brown Act provisions, did you?
Actually, we're meeting the spirit of the provisions of the Brown Act by virtue of all of our administrative operations and our board oversight and our federal funding regulations, and that is the response that we gave. If you would like another copy of that letter,
For the record,
Is there any other person in the audience representing any organization who wishes to speak on this?
Just one quickly. So what aspects do you think that you're not meeting?
I don't believe that there are any aspects that we are not meeting. The reason, frankly, that KVIE objected to the request is because it's another step for us to go through, which seems unnecessary given all of the regulations that we do already adhere to. Mr. Esposito just said that he'd be willing to talk with us about an alternative to that, and I think that's a wonderful approach.
Well, Mr. Hirschberger stood there at the last meeting, says we intend fully to comply.
We are in compliance, is exactly what he said.
There's no grantee who finds this to be a difficult procedure, from what I understand. Is there anyone else in the audience representing a grantee who has any comment? Thanks, Jan. We have the mode of coming forward established now, and we hope you will feel free to do that just that way.
for the record, Mr. Chairman, that the correspondence with KVIE was quite clear. That's on 3 occasions for a statement of what hardships it would provide. And on 3 occasions, it was rebuffed generally without saying exactly what the difficulty was. The thing I like about the Brown Act is that it's codified, it's familiar to everyone, and it has lots and lots of legal interpretation. We don't have to sit down and negotiate and rebuild new rules. It's existed for a long time. We know what it is.
Now, just the meeting notification, I think, poses an extra amount of labor on anybody that has to comply with the Brown Act. I don't really see any reason that any of the grantees should have to post the notice 3 days in advance and go through the other requirements of the Brown Act.
Well, I have to back Rich up because I've been a proponent of this. One of the things that I think we've all found is that we're not really, it's very difficult and time consumptive to regulate things after the fact. And certainly all of us have seen the effects of having to discuss some of these things publicly. And as Rich has said, I encouraged him really to link it to the Brown Act because of the body of regulatory authority, so there's no question about who does what. But more importantly, it's going to avoid disputes which otherwise regulatorily, after the fact, would come to you. When Rich finds something that may have proceeded amiss, you have to deal with it from a regulatory standpoint, where if you really just encourage the grantees by the condition of the grant to do things publicly and out in the open, a lot of these matters will never come to you because they'll be taken care of in the public consideration. If there are disputes, for example, within the grantee organizations or among groups that use the grantee organizations, they'll have a chance to ventilate those in those public sessions, and rather than waiting until after the fact and then coming down here and confronting you folks with, why don't you do something to help us and get them back on the track? It's easier to encourage them to do it publicly to begin with. It was kind of offered in the nature of a self-effectuating mechanism to allow the public to do the work in advance rather than force you folks to do it after the fact.
Phil, representing one of our groups here, go right ahead. Phil Corriveau.
Just as a point of clarification, and we don't have a problem complying with the Brown Act, but since the cable funds make up part of our budget, would that just apply when there were cable matters on the agenda, for example, or would it apply to all the activities of the organization?
Well, we're under the impression that the cable funds are not just another source of general funding, but are specialized funding devoted to specialized purposes. So it would seem to us that it would be relatively easy to segment those decisions where you were dealing with cable commission funds. It isn't the sort of thing that every time you approve a travel allowance, it's got cable commission funds on it, but it seems like that's pretty well defined. In your case, what we're funding, and in KVIE's case, it's a separate channel. It shouldn't be the broad operations of Channel 6, for example. So we didn't see any practical obstacles of any great size because of the relative segmentability, if that's a word, of the cable commission expenditures.
Maybe I should ask you then one quick question, and I understand what Mr. Strain's problem is in relationship to the number of days and weeks that you have to put your agendas out. If someone has a problem or is sick or something, you don't get it out, it has to be put in the newspaper. The openness of these meetings, I agree with you, because this is public money, and whenever public money is involved, it should be a very open process for everyone to participate in, that it is their money. And I think most commonly these groups do that because they want the public involved as volunteers and as their participating as their listeners or as their viewers or so forth. The only problem I would see is we in local government have to comply so strictly. Is there a way for them to not have to comply with those things quite so strictly? Sure, their agendas need to be public, but we're down to how many days that they have to be noticed, how many times they have to be noticed before they can go on an agenda. And I'm not sure that it makes their function of their organizations more efficient to have an attorney around to tell them, well, can I take action this week, or does it have to be republicized again before I can take action? The public part of it, I totally agree with you, but I'm not familiar enough with the Brown Act in relationship to the grantees, whether they would be held as closely as we are. And in government, we ought to be, believe me. I'm not disagreeing with that, but...
Only one grantee has said they have a problem with it, and if they'd like to articulate what the hardships are, maybe we can work out a way around those.
Yeah, I think that's...
Everybody else said okay.
Let me just say one thing about the question you raised, that there's a difference, and that is we're using the Brown Act here contractually as a standard. So, for example, criminal penalties, which apply to you folks, would not apply to the grantees. Right. So enforcement of those standards would be ultimately up to you. In other words, if there were a violation of the Brown Act, it wouldn't submit these people to any criminal liability, but it would be something that your director could bring to you against a measurable standard at the time the contract was to be renewed as to whether or not there'd been compliance. And yes, we could formulate our own standard, but the reason we're here and spending all this precious time of you folks is because we want to try to short-circuit this. So my advice to Rich was, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's take the standards that exist, and where the Attorney General's issued many, many interpretations and so forth, and drop them in contractually as a standard for the conduct of the business with the money that you give them. Not with all their money, but just with the money you give them. So that since you're not making specific appropriations, when those appropriations are made contractually, they will have agreed to do it that way. But certainly you could go through, and if we're of a mind to do it, we could go through the Brown Act and take those provisions and say, but not this one or not that one. We can certainly do that. We kind of took the easiest road for a general standard of how to conduct the public's business and kind of dropped it in the contract by reference.
Okay. And that is involving all the nuances that were just passed relating to...
They were vetoed, as Rich just
I'm sorry.
reported.
So
yeah.
Who had the courage? The governor had the courage to veto?
I think he's the only one with a veto power, but...
That's true. Well, they're not going to override it, I hope. But
Jan, you were up here to bat. Do you wish to yield to him, or would you like to be?
No,
Jan Tillman.
I'm here to say that I regret that the Commission is spending this kind of time on this issue, and if, for KVIE's purposes, if you can specify that the reasonable provisions of the Brown Act apply to those activities which are directly under Commission funding, we don't have a problem with that.
Great.
None of the communication that we have had to date has segregated the Commission-funded activities from the whole of the organization. So that, hearing that today, that's less of a problem for KVIE. And actually, for everyone's sake, I would hope that we can move on.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Jan.
I agree with
think
that
that does solve
narrower
the problem.
definition, and I think that solves KXBR if they even had any problems.
Sure.
Same thing, they're much, much bigger organizations. We're a very small part of any other.
Are you a Brown Act speaker?
I didn't intend to be, Orwell.
Oh, it's an attorney.
Yes, one of those. Snuck in while you weren't looking.
Sneak.
I didn't intend to speak on it. For Access Sacramento, we have no problem with the principle of the Brown Act. It's something that we have been following substantially in principle and in practice. The only concern I have is when Brenda's saying that the Brown Act has a long history and Attorney General interpretations and so forth. I fear that my client is going to have to call me all the time and get interpretations on how it's going to be used. The other thing is the advance notice requirement, the burden of doing that. The cost of that, is that really necessary to the extent that you're having standard meetings? With regard to the open meeting aspect of the law, it is absolutely, I think, critical for the grantees to be open, and we are, except in those narrow circumstances under the Brown Act where they need to be private. So what you might want to do on this is provide direction to staff to focus on the open meeting aspect, perhaps not the advance notice, although that's up to you, because of the cost burden, and then we can work it out in negotiation. Thank you.
Well, if I could just express my view, I think the open meeting aspect is what I'm more interested in than the noticing. Noticing, yes, should be fair. Maybe 3 days is a little extreme for these kinds of organizations. Maybe 12 hours, 6 hours is enough. But I think the intent is the openness of the meetings, and I certainly concur with that. So if we could adopt the conditions of the Brown Act as it relates to open meetings and modify the notification so that everybody's in agreement, I think we have a deal.
Because most of these groups have regular meeting times.
Well, that's what I was going to suggest, is that the problem is that they don't have a place like this where everyone knows where the Board of Supervisors meets. They could meet in the Holiday Inn. But if we could, I don't think the agenda noticing is as important as letting the people who are interested in following the organization know when the meetings are going to be and where they're going to be held, so they can be there if they want to be.
One easy way for each of them to do that, all of them have a channel, and right on the channel,
good thought,
they could run, we use that medium, meeting.
Maybe require it there 3 days in advance.
Well, we can play with reductions in the number of notifications if they don't change their meeting location and regular dates and that sort of thing, if that's the desire of the commission.
Good. That's what I'm much more interested in too.
What we have here is enough of a consensus that Rich, you and staff, when you review this tape, pull from it those narrower elements, put them together. At our next meeting, we'll get a verification of that.
Okay.
We can't spend more time today, right? Mm-hmm. The next one, C, insurance requirements specified. Does that lead to any discussion on anyone's part? Commission? Audience?
No.
Well, we need again for Rich to say what does him.
Here they come.
Yes, I hope I'm not out of order in saying this. I can see the...
We'll let you know.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. I can see the direction that you're going with on the agenda. What we have in item 1A are broad concepts. What we received at the conclusion of the last meeting is the draft, what has been referred to as the draft boilerplate language. And I heard earlier in the meeting today that that may be asked, you may be asked to approve that. I think that my concern is that these broad concepts that are listed here are not entirely representative of what I read in the language of the contract, the draft contract. For example, in our meeting, in the last meeting that we had, Rich said that one of the things he'd like to do is see that there's more consistency among the grantees in terms of what we're doing with insurance provisions, and in fact that maybe some of us were doing more with insurance than necessary. Sounded great. When I looked at the language in the draft agreement, however, turned that over to my business office, I just heard from them yesterday that in fact there are more requirements, more reports, and possibly more expense involved in insurance and liability insurance than we have in our existing contracts. I don't know any of the details of that yet, and I feel it's a bit premature to even bring it up, except I'm bringing it up for this purpose. I don't think that we're seeing everything in A through J that represents the concerns of the grantees. We see more concern in the actual language of the draft agreement. It may well be that the insurance works out. I can certainly well understand that sitting down in a negotiating session that we would be able to work those things out. I'm sure you can all imagine that KVIE is adequately insured. But in fact, if we had to spend additional dollars for insurance than we are now, that would not be reasonable. So I'm bringing this up at this point because it's a good example. I think that if we're discussing broad concepts today and we can get to a point where we're talking about some policy direction, that's terrific. But I would like to make the statement that I think it is premature to approve the draft contract language as it is written unless you have had the opportunity to read all 28 pages or whatever it is. And that's my comment.
My difficulty would be even if I read all the insurance, I wouldn't understand it. So my first question would be, who provided the advice to Rich on all the insurance and where'd the language
summarize the issue first, as Mrs. Roby asked. In reviewing the insurance requirements under the existing grant agreement, and that's one of the things that's provided that the Commission has access to that, and in fact has access to the policies. There were some important things that surfaced. One, the range of coverage amongst the grantees was very, very broad. Two, on the lower end, I became concerned that there was adequate protection of the Commission from the grantees. Remember that they're supposed to hold the grantees are supposed to hold the commission harmless in many respects. I copied all those to Brent and asked Brent to prepare a specification for the grant agreement based on his expertise. Brent reviewed it and can comment from that point.
Oh, we didn't really set out to invent the wheel here. What we did was took some existing government contract language on basic liability, auto, workers' comp insurance, etc., and just dropped it in. We did not think that this was to be done by fiat. We thought we were really going to, once you approved this and sent us out, we were going to meet with the grantees in light of Rich's idea on number one that the terms could vary and discuss it with them. And if, you know, I'm not here to certify that this is the absolute minimum that has to be in an insurance provision, merely that we did take a little different approach than we've ever taken before. Rather than just say, well, they'll provide us with adequate insurance, and then put the bug, if you will, on Rich's back when the insurance policy came in to look at all the forms and so forth, we took the approach of dropping in this language that specifies forms and amounts and so forth. But this did not come to me on plates of gold. So, I mean, we really wanted to open this dialogue, but just if it costs us more than we currently pay, then it's unreasonable. I don't think that's going to be helpful to you. It's certainly not helpful to me. What I'd like to do is talk with someone who says we can't live with, see that second line, that's just something we can't do, or it cost us this number of dollars. And certainly that's something that we ought to be able to bring back to you. But I don't know if that's a productive use of your time here today.
Well, these are generalizations. They're not intended for a lot of discussion. The most basic question to commission is, do you want to see insurance requirements in the contract, or do you not? When we get to 1B, if they're out, we're not even going to discuss insurance provision. If they're in, then we get into the details of it. That's all we're doing here.
Well, obviously you're going to want insurance, and I think what Brent says is probably important, that there will be an opportunity to talk with each and every grantee. Some grantees, might pose very, very little risk to the commission, and minimal insurance. Others, because of other considerations, there might be a need for insurance in an area that maybe one grantee won't have. As long as we understand that if there are real irreconcilable differences, we're going to be able to deal with that.
That's actually what I was hoping to establish here, is that by virtue of agreement to broad concepts, that today we're not making decisions about the specific language in the draft grantee agreements. That was the purpose of my point.
Yeah, I think everyone in the room would believe we need insurance of some kind.
It's very specific.
But and it's the concept level, and we can't spend a lot of time on that. Either yay or nay is the answer, and that goes for some of these others. You have a worthy word of advice here?
Orville, you're absolutely right. Everyone knows we need insurance. Everyone knows we have it now under the current contract. We're going to have it in the future. Let me just say this, that some of these provisions, all of these provisions are ones that the real issues and disagreements, if there are any, and on something like insurance, we may very well end up having none whatsoever, are ones that will percolate up to the surface after Brent and Rich and the other grantees and their representatives sit down and go over it. So what today's session and the direction we got out of the September meeting of the Commission was that today's session was to be a general policy review of community programming as opposed to a micromanagement sort of review of any provision, because since the time of the last commission meeting and this one, there have been no negotiations that have been undergoing, because we've been awaiting this commission meeting to have a general review of goals and general policies with relating to community program, as opposed to particular terms of the agreement.
If I agree with what Craig has just said, and if what we really need from you folks is that these points are reflected in this agreement in language that, even if they agree on these points, may not be acceptable, and we'll have to negotiate. But it doesn't make much sense to send us out to negotiate this agreement if it has a concept that you don't approve of. And that's why we're here, not so you're not buying into the wording of this document, because that's not what it's here for. But what we do need your direction on are whether this is the concept approach you want to proceed with. If you do, then we'll meet with them, and if we have disputes, as always in the past, we'll come back to you. But you're not blessing this language today. You are blessing concepts today, so that we can go out and negotiate, because otherwise we don't have any basis to do that.
I just had one quick. You know, and I think everybody should have insurance, and I think because I think the commission has to protect it, plus, you know, the volunteers and stuff. But you know, on page 4, where you talk about the insurance coverage, and then it goes to page 5, and yeah, it's very specific, and I think it's maybe too specific. I think the first paragraph talks about, you know, it's more general. The insurance should include insurance coverage against claims for injury and personal damage of property and so forth. But then it goes down and it talks about general liability being $1 million combined with single limits. Then it goes on to automobile liability being $1 million and so forth. And I'm not sure that we are in a position to tell them that it ought to be $1 million, it ought to not be $1 million. And I'd feel. And then it goes on and talks about workers' compensation, and maybe it's okay, and maybe that's what they have anyway. But I'd feel a little more comfortable with something more general, as to, and maybe it's all right to put but I don't know. I think if I read all this in very carefully in all these very specific terms, I might be a little concerned about whether I could comply with every single bit of it also. And you go on to talk about failure to comply with reporting provisions, and you talk more about how they will comply separately on each of these claims and things. And that's, I think, that bothers me. It's awfully specific, and I wonder whether we should be doing that.
Well, you're going to eventually resolve these disputes. The question is how you do it. If you put a general provision in there, when the policy shows up, Rich is going to have to look at it and decide whether it complies with the spirit of what you've adopted. I'm not suggesting that these are the final specifics, but what we've learned and we have learned some things over the 10 years that we've been involved, is that we've had difficulty with different types of insurance. And if you have much experience with the way these policies are written, sometimes exclusions are typed in. We just, and they're added by endorsement. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a matter of what's the rule that Rich is to use relative to this matter. I want to encourage you to let if we're going to take an approach of saying it's general, then that's what we've been doing, and if that's what you'd like to do, we can continue to do that. That puts a little greater burden on Rich's discretion in reviewing it, but it's certainly doable.
Yeah, well, I think maybe some of them can be incorporated. It's very specific, though.
Well, I'm ready to change the subject.
Okay.
I am too. Do it for me.
Could I ask Rich to explain the rationale for H, please? Unused funds at the end of a particular grant, returned to the Commission.
Oh, I still wanted to do F and G. I didn't have any problem with D or E.
Well, I don't mind coming back. If you can't skip around, I'll let you go to D next. But
no, I was okay on D and E. I didn't have any problems.
You got to read them, though.
Okay, let's deal with H. Unused funds at the end of the grant returned to the Commission. Right now, there's absolutely no. Well, there's a very good incentive to over budget. As I review the grant budgets, I see excess funds in each budget. Looking at how this department is operated, how other city, county departments are operated, it's standard practice. If you're going to be either entitled to funds, which you keep at the end of the year, then there's a more thorough review of the budget, and the budget is reviewed in a lot more detail. The example with the county this year is that the county made 25 to 50% cuts in some departments. Well, told departments after that, if you can squeeze anything else out, you can keep it. On the other hand, if you make a very light review of the budget, then I don't believe it's appropriate to promote and support over budgeting at the end of the cycle by saying you can retain those funds. Further, it's been my experience now in 2 years and looking in a little bit more detail at the grantee budgets that I have difficulty surfacing the money that was left over. Only in this last year have I had a reasonable level of comfort. I've been told in previous years, that's our money now, you can't look at that. And I've had to ask for and reconcile the budgets from year to year. Where is the cash? And that's one of the reasons, or one of the things that the audit began to surface. I just think it's good business. Lastly, if there are excess funds at the end of a grant, then it says that the grant was budgeted high, or that the grant didn't produce the product that it wanted. By bringing the funds back in, it lets the Commission redirect those funds to another high priority purpose in the next budget cycle.
Did that response answer your topic?
I disagree with Rich 180 degrees. I don't agree with that. I understand what you're saying, but I don't agree with it. I think the funds that are granted, that are allowed to the grantee, should be theirs to spend as they have budgeted, and I think they should be accountable for a budget, but not to the point where they would recklessly encumber the funds at the end of the fiscal year because of some reason they hadn't expended the funds earlier in the year. And I've seen that happen, and I publicly will admit I have done that under those kinds of constraints. And it's just not a prudent use of public money. And I think they should have the flexibility of encumbering those funds the way they have planned, and if they need some assistance in planning, then they ought to get that assistance, but not to foolishly spend those funds at the end of the fiscal year because they're going to lose them.
Well, Rich may not have made clear that that's the precise question, is whether or not they have to spend the funds as budgeted. It's not a question of whether they can, if they don't spend them and they're in the process of spending them and they have commitments to spend them or something like that. The real question is, if they don't spend them as budgeted and funds are left over, what happens to them? Are they outside the budget then? And that doesn't seem right, because then there's the incentive not to, exactly as you said, Director, to spend them as budgeted, because that's why you're giving them the money. So the question is, what do you do if they're not spent as budgeted, but there's a little pot left over? You've got a couple of choices. Give them back and we'll go through the process again, or spend them as budgeted in the next year, and so you've got to account for them in next year's budget, and you can do that. But what it seems reasonable from a standpoint of controlling public expenditure is they don't become free funds. I mean, they're not off budget the minute the year expires if they weren't spent according to budget. So the question here is, what kind of mechanism do you use to make sure that they're spent for the purposes you appropriated them?
There's another way to look at that too, depending on which group you're dealing with. And if you're doing multi-year grants, and I really do favor multi-year grants. I think it gives everybody a better way to plan to do multi-year grants. But I really do feel that there's an incentive to do things better if you really up front look at a budget, ask questions, get all of that settled up front, and in the middle of doing that, an entity discovers some cost savings. I would think one of the prudent things to do would be like they do at SETA, which Toby's familiar with, we both serve on it. As long as it furthers the goal of the group and the programming, we provide for a way to bring that back to the governing body and to move that money into another portion. All it does is provide the budget flexibility for the group to use that money, but they don't lose it. The only time they do lose it is if they finally say to the agency, we can't spend it in this fiscal year, because we're not usually talking about multi-years, but we can't, in all good conscience, spend it in this program. It's not going to work, so we're going to release it, and then we redirect it to another agency doing the very same type of approach. That is also a prudent way to do it. What I don't want to do is get into the point, because the county is changing right now the way they're going to do budgeting with departments. what you hate to get into as an organization, feeling that they have to spend it or lose it. And all of us hate that system. But we feel that if they've come up with creative ways, and the Horn's dilemma is you don't want to inflate the budget either. But you could pick that up within the first year or two. You could pick up a group that is, coming to you routinely and saying, oh, we want to, now spend it in a different way. So I just don't think, I think we ought to build in the incentives to spend it well and give them a way to come back and say we want to redirect these monies. We do this with all of our departments. We give them the opportunity to redirect monies.
All this provision says, the operative language is on page 11, is that they shall spend it solely for the purpose listed in the grant. And then the sentence says, funds not expended in the term covered by a grant may not be carried over into succeeding years for grants, nor used for any other purpose without the grantor's approval. So all that means is they'll come back to you and say, here's what we propose to do with the money we had left over, and you grant your approval to it. All we're trying to prevent is that take away any incentive to not spend money in hopes that it becomes somehow off-budget money. It doesn't become that without your approval. Now, you can make it off-budget money, or you can say, instead of spending it for X, spend it for Y, but it doesn't go out from under your control and just by virtue of the passage of time. That's all the provision says.
Yeah, I know sometimes we've had things come up where we've had to say, okay, we're going to have to take the money from the salary savings and we're going to have to buy a piece of capital with it. You absolutely have to. And so you just make that, the case is made and the governing body says, great, we understand, that's what you're going to have to do.
Dan Tillman?
I very much agree with the comments the Commission has made on this topic, and I'd like to add a couple. There are multiple provisions in the language, in the draft language of these agreements, which provide oversight for budget and the use of those funds. And I think they're more than sufficient to ensure that the grantees are using the dollars as budgeted and for the purpose that has been approved by the Commission. Speaking from years of experience on this topic in two different ways, one in an organization where this provision did exist. If monies were not spent, they reverted in the last case to a county agency. It is not an incentive for people to take better care of business. It is an incentive to overspend.
Right.
And certainly my experience with KVIE and with the operation of Cable 7, we have had to learn ways to very creatively save money in order for us to sustain the quality of service for this operation. And I'm very much opposed to this provision.
Because we haven't talked about over budget and overspend.
This is a topic which we probably have carried as far as we can. It's not a big point at this moment, but a year from now it is significant. I think what is developing here is the idea, knowing full well that in any organization you have some funds left over or not used, shall we say, for the purpose originally dedicated. And what we're going to do, I think, to save some time is to say we'll rework this statement. We'll come into a compliance effect that the money is to remain accounted for, and by common agreement it is used for purpose A, B, or C in the new budget year. And I think we should move on then if you'll commonly agree to that idea.
We do.
Okay. Now, we had gone to H. Does D raise any questions? Audits, insurance, and certain other record-keeping requirements may be waived. That sounds peculiar because generally you would say there must be audits and record-keeping requirements. So I'm going to ask Rich if you will explain the reason you stated it this way.
The example I use here is one of our small grantees, KXPR. Their grant is in the $15,000 to $20,000 range. I think it's inappropriate to put the same administrative burden on them as we do with Access, who has $500,000. And I want the ability to negotiate in the grants, not in the contract, in the grants, specific waivers of requirements that are within the grant contract to reduce or eliminate some of the administrative reporting burdens.
Okay, we agree with that.
Is there any objection to that attitude?
No.
Anything from the audience? All right, we'll move on to E, multi-year grants. This is a concept. It's very generally stated, but it serves the idea that we try to get over the hump of working just a year at a time, so there's no assurance of what future support is going to be. This is especially important in the field of purchasing of equipment, of expanding services, and so on, even when it comes to employing people. You have to know in this business of the grantees that there is an assurance of a continuing flow of funds, whatever the sum may be, and probably that's why we use the term multi-year grants. Now, what comment does this require now?
Good.
I like the concept.
Okay. No comment adverse? Yes, go ahead, please. Your name?
Yes, I'm David Beck. I'm chairperson of SECC. Basically, we have no problem with the concept of multi-year grants. Our problem is that we do not agree that the multi-year grant would work in a program sense. Now, perhaps that's because of misunderstanding on my part. I do understand that a multi-year grant in an organizational sense does make sense for us.
I guess I was addressing it in an organizational sense too, because I've got big question marks about some of the others, that how is it going to work?
Program-wise, could staff reply to that? How do you...
Those are the next 2 points. Why don't you... Those are the key concepts of this whole approach. Why don't you address F and G on the issues? That'll flesh out this whole program versus organizational business.
Well, and that's why I and J fall into that same idea. And if you don't agree with the basic concept, then we've got to go back to the square one on how we approach that. And that does tie to multi-year grants.
So for concept, we have said multi-year grants is our attitude.
Yeah, organizationally, but
we haven't talked about
programmatic.
programming.
Yes.
Agreement on that.
All right, F. Funding allocations and grants based on the approved goals. Is there any comment on this from commission members?
So let me ask a question first. Rich, in terms of what percentage of grantees' budget do you propose would be a funding allocation, and what percentage would be a grant?
I don't understand your question, Mr. Costanza.
For example, Access Sacramento has traditionally a $500,000 budget annually. They're probably anticipating $500,000 next year. Are you saying that any grants they get would be subtracted from that $500,000, or would be in addition to that?
The grants would be whatever the number would be, whether it be, I'm saying that there would be no allocation. The process should be focused on first a grant, call it a fixed allocation if you will, or a permanent grant, a multi-year grant for base operational organization funding. That's that which takes care of the facility, management, pays the lights, heat, rent, etc. So that would become a fixed base for every entity, and that would, in your terms, would be the organizational grant. Beyond
so
that,
that's operational money.
Operational base money.
Salary, administration.
Administration, right. Not for everybody and everything, but base operation that keeps the doors open.
Then what are grants?
That to me would be the base grant, the initial grant.
Then what are the other kinds of grants?
Okay, the other types of grants are funding allocations, grants, tied to the goals you approved last month.
You mean specifically this goal here you'd have, in other words, before you could...
Right, you approved goals last month. There will be free speech public access to the cable system with a 72-hour delay with adequate protection of First Amendment rights. Access Sacramento applies for a grant in an amount that they choose to address that goal. They specify the performance criteria. They request a term, a long term if they wish for that grant, and describe to you the resources they'll put into it, the resources they're requesting, I'm sorry, and the outcomes that will result from that particular grant.
What percentage then of a fixed amount would be operational grant as opposed to the other grants?
Can't give you a percentage now. The grantees would have to develop that based on specification of what the base grant would be. Again, I see the base grant being the facility, management, heat, rent, lights,
See, I don't have a problem with grants. I think it's good that the grantees have goals and apply for grant money to achieve those goals. And I think they have to be performance-based, and I think we ought to be able to measure those as the public agency that allocates that fund. What I'm having trouble with is the fact there are 4 boards out there with each grantee that has volunteers who are board members, and their job has been to function to provide the approval of the expenditure of those funds, similar to grants. I mean, it's expenditure of their budget. So I don't know what they would do then if this commission all of a sudden were to allocate funds based upon specific grants that they had written. Then what function would their boards provide? And up until now, they have had X number of dollars to do a job, okay, to provide public access programming. Now, all of a sudden, these rules are changed, and I don't know how their board will function.
Well, if I may, one of the things that their boards would, I think, develop into would be they'd have their own analysis of which of their activities are actually performing and producing, where they're delivering, if you will, bang for the buck. And the next year, you would see more in those areas and less in areas that hadn't performed. The problem that Rich has is you really can't, with any kind of legal document, you cannot put performance milestones into entitlement grants, because there's just no way of measuring. You get anecdotal evidence, you get wonderful presentations month after month or quarterly as your meetings come along of what they're doing, but there's no way to tie the money, which portions of the money that you gave them go to that activity, nor is there any way realistically for Rich to evaluate and comment to you on how efficiently they're delivering that. So their boards could do a much more effective job if they were in that mode. But whether you want to do that is the key thing, and really hinges on performance milestones. What we've had is, and we did this purposely because the law was different, as I explained to you last time, and we basically gave the money 5 years ago or 6 years ago with no effective performance milestones, no termination. We knew that we had no termination, and we did that purposefully, and we explained it to you at the time. There was no hope of putting any real performance ties to that money. So it became entitlement money, in effect, much like a entitlement in the sense of a non-performance grant. You were giving the grant with the hope that the folks would deliver the programming, and there was just no way of knowing that they did. So what Rich is proposing here is a different concept, and if you don't like it, we don't have to do it, but you just have to understand that if we continue to enter on this process, there's just no effective way of having any evaluation of performance. You can review budgets until you're green in the face, and you can't tell whether the money is really delivering anything or not. So the issue is performance milestones, because you can't do it from a regulatory fashion otherwise.
But how do you set performance standards? I mean, here's the big understanding gap that each member, I would assume, of this commission is trying to grapple with. We have a limited number of channels. We have been very used to having those channels programmed because none of us want to get involved in programming. We've had them programmed by different entities, each of which, you're correct, do have boards that should be playing an active role. I think the fear that, if I can articulate, like for instance where I'm coming from, is that we're going to be asked to set all kinds of programming goals for what we think are needed in the community. I mean, us, what we think is needed on community programming. In different areas from the way we're doing it now. Right now we're saying, yes, we believe there's an important function for community government programming, so we've got a government channel. I mean, we didn't design this system, but we ended up with it. But I think as we've grown with it, we've discovered, okay, there is a need. There's an awfully lot of people out there who watch a government channel. Maybe they're government junkies, but they watch it. We determined, and as did the person who ultimately was a cable operator, that there's a big need for educational opportunities in the community. And so actually I think 2 of those are devoted to that kind of function. And then also the same with the KVIE and the Channel 7 and the people who are the devoted followers of that channel. And with the radio with KXPR, and with access channels, and all the different opportunities that have been available with the access channels to people in the community. What this commission has not heard from the community at all is that they're unhappy with the current system. And I don't know how you measure happiness, unhappiness with the current system, or how we would go about setting up a system radically different from this. Because the way I look at the radical reform that we would be going into without fully understanding it and having a lot of fears about it is that you might end up with very different types of channel allocations. You might end up with everybody on everybody else's channel. You would end up with this commission maybe making just subjective value judgments among itself about how many more education dollars we might want spent or how much something else we might want spent. There's where the fear level is coming from. And I assume it's coming from the grantees.
I want to say to you, Isla, I have worked with what this proposal is for many years in the school business, and it works very well. Let's take an example. Approved goals, let's say one of the goals is 20 hours of actual programming on the air of the public health system that exists in Sacramento County. The performance milestone is nothing more than a calendarization of events from July 1st on as to when the deadlines are to get certain portions of this done. And it works very well because it definitizes it. And it is worthy of trying because what, in the long run, I see, we are going to have to over and over re-justify granting these funds because other demands for the same funds are going to become more imperative year by year as we go along. And all I'm after,
making an assumption there will be some funds,
is to get a system going which has not only accountability, responsibility, but actually shows that these people are performing by proposals that they gave us, which in turn inspired us to grant them the funds. That's what we're trying to do.
And I'm trying to get to the other step. The other step of that is how do we get the input on what the public wants?
Well,
because we don't have a notion now, I get positive responses, not negative, in terms of what's on the cable system and what they turn into and what they see and the variety they see. So what gives me any input, any more so than the boards of directors of the groups, that there's an unmet need out there that this commission needs to direct funds towards? I could understand if we had a lot of testimony on unmet need and we set aside a portion over here of money and we said, okay, this portion is up for grabs, and maybe one of the different channels will actually be enhanced by this amount and set that away from some of the basic grant approaches. I can even understand that as a beginning step. What I can't understand is going all the way from one system to another system.
You can do any combination of midpoints that you want to do along the way too. The key concept though that we need to know is whether you're really interested in creating this quasi-marketplace for grants. It is modeled after, as Orwell says, on the academic model because that's the way all money is apportioned through a quasi-competitive process. If you're not interested in doing that, we can just divide it up and let them go.
Yes, but not without a basic entitlement. There's always that basic entitlement first. And that's what I haven't heard yet, and that's what we talked about earlier.
So
what Rich said, two issues going here. There is a basic entitlement. You call it a basic entitlement, I call it a base grant. That is part of this.
Yeah, but you were very narrowly defining it as if almost like a facilities. And I think that what we have to trust is there's enough creativity out there with these groups to put together programming. After all, what we want are people to watch the programs. They're targeting towards audiences.
Let me be real specific, and I think we're all part of this with Channel 2 problem with SAC Cable. The Asian community felt like they had lost some very vital programming. A lot of the minority groups, the ethnic groups in this community felt that they had some programming taken away from them. We directed them to Access Sacramento. We said, okay, that's the agency then that can help you with that. Now that to me says, okay, here is here's your basic entitlement for you to function like you normally do. Now here's the need out there. The Italian community is demanding this kind of ethnic program.
Access can't buy it.
The Asian community is asking for this kind of program. Then that's where we ought to be in a place to provide a grant to meet that need based upon a goal established by Access Sacramento. That's how I see grants working, not working on a daily operational mode. So I like to see it divided, Rich, some way where the grantees work like they normally do, but out here is this something special, this incentive to get extra money to do these kinds of things that we perceive are needs that are not being met.
The question that we have to have then is how much money out of the pot available do you want to carve out for that purpose, and we can make it work. And it can be anything from zero, where it is now, with 100% entitlement, to 100% at the other end. If you wanted 80-20, 50-50, all you have to do is take a vote and tell us, and that's the way it'll be.
See, I'd like to see some transition between the way we're used to doing it and where we...
I think I agree with that.
I think everybody would feel more comfortable than just jumping to a different system.
Let me ask you one quick question. And I agree with this, is I think that maybe we need to do things a little bit slower, but do you have a good way, or are you going to look at what the expenses of each of the grantees is and try to readjust any of the money? You're not going to... You think you've done that in the past?
No, this is a critical point. We are on an entitlement-based funding program now. When you eliminated the senior position here in 1988, you eliminated virtually all of the oversight of the grantees. The oversight now is between August 1st and September 1st when I get the grant agreements. And I'll tell you, you heard very loudly when I started to look at the budgets, you as elected officials. I heard, why are you doing this? How dare you do this? The ability, the oversight level of your grantees right now is a 2 on a scale of 10 relative to what the 7th floor is doing in this building. Now, in an entitlement funding mode, that's fine, as long as you understand that. We're getting.
We had from 1849 to grow into our current system.
All right. We have. But here's the issue. Here's the part why I go back to the budget presentation in June. You're getting big picture funding now. It's existed for 5 years, but you've been hit with several key issues, and was hit already. I think this afternoon. When you approved the grant contracts 5 years ago, there's language in there that says it is our intention to fund these long term, and you keep hearing that was a promise. That was a promise. The language, the next paragraph says, notwithstanding the above, all this ends in 5 years. The point I'm trying to get through is 4 years down the road. What you're setting up now will come back at you as a general fund issue in 1997. And to continue this program in 1997, it will be up against the traditional general fund or TOT allocations. To do that, the community program activities need substance, need data, need justification, and the entitlement mode won't get you there. So I said in June, we have time, we have plenty of time to make the transition. Maybe I've made it by giving you where we ought to be 4 or 5 years from now, and we have to cut the pieces up and begin it. But I'm looking at 96, 97 when the contract money from Sac Cable stops and the franchise fee money doesn't appear.
Director Roby said last time something about, isn't there a way to start with a smaller percentage of this, and I think that's the important point. What Rich has given you is 5 years down the line where you can have these folks competing for grant money with each other in a healthy fashion that allows you to react to situations like the minority community concern that you had. But you don't have to do that in one fell swoop. And what we need to know is, do you want to carve out any money out of the entitlement funding for performance funding, or do you want to have, and if so, do you want to do 20% the first year? Do you want to do 40%? Do you want to do 0%? That's all we need to know. We can do performance funding or entitlement funding. We can write the agreement. Either way you want to go. We just need to know what it is you want to do.
I'm going to call for a vote. Shortly after 4:30, there's going to be no quorum here.
Okay. Can I ask one question about that, though, if we're going to make that decision today?
Speak fast.
Okay. If we're going to make that kind of decision today, I still haven't reached the next hurdle on where, how this group would make a decision. on where you would want to direct those years, that money, because that unmet need issue is really a very, very tricky one in terms of what the community might think. Because I'll tell you, unmet needs for our community services block grant program only means who comes the day of the hearing and makes the most noise.
How many are here?
Yeah. Well, there's an easy alternative if you wanted to transition in. We could transition in by a bifurcated process, continue for next year the existing allocation base, but require that the documentation be provided in the new format so that you receive more detail than you currently get on what the grantees are doing within their entitlement program and what the milestones are that they intend and expect to achieve. Make that the first year.
Milestones measured against what?
Whatever they want to say. Right now you only have one milestone, basically. That's how many hours of programming.
That's true.
Yeah, we don't know how many people are trained. We don't know how many people are in the classroom. We don't know the cost per person or any other kind of indicator that tells us more about what's going on inside.
I would suggest, in response to your question, that probably the best model would be the National Endowment of Humanities or the National Endowment for the Arts. I think you have the same problem there. The people that sit on those boards don't have people coming to them with unmet needs. They have people clamoring for money for grants. And how would you make the decision? Your own good sense.
So what you would say is, to further the broad goals that we would put out, you would set aside 60,000, 80,000, something like that.
I don't have a clue.
And each person, I don't have a clue yet what it should be, but and each grantee, or maybe some grantee we haven't heard from yet, and we'd have to direct them to which channel they'd be able to get on with that program, would really apply for that for programming. I think almost all the grantees would love to have some money to do some programming with. Because, Terry, the things you're talking about, I agree, are unmet needs, but also after hearing from that community, every one of those programs they wanted are produced outside this region. They are produced and would cost us money to buy. We can't do that. And they contain commercials, which we can't do on these channels. So,
some of it's pretty bad programming.
Unless somebody out there wants to put a Cantonese soap opera together, or something like that.
Exactly right.
And maybe that's what you get. Now, I remember sitting through some very painful revenue sharing hearings where we got all kinds of things, maybe 85 grants for this little bitty money, and listening to everybody's idea of what they thought was needed and why their grant should win. Maybe you want to try that for a short time, but I'll tell you, it'd be pretty wild.
Well, because we all do it. We all have different sets of grants. We do it at the city, the same thing. We have 50 grantees for 75 cents. The only...
I have an idea. Don't build a convention center and you save all that money. So in 1997, put it into a fund now where it starts getting interest so we can have some good programming, right?
Well, but see, maybe that's what we need to do with some of this cable money, is put it aside and put it and invest it so that, that we do. And I think there's some sense about an endowment fund for the arts. And I don't know what it is. I don't know how much money it is, and that's what I'm very uneasy about. And I have a sneaking suspicion, if you got the grantees together, that they might be willing to at least tell you where they think it is, and then at least you could build on that. But I think they'd like to have some money that they could apply for. See, I see no good reason why using the Asian community that came to us, and I'm sure they have a problem because I've talked to a lot of them, why we locally could not say there is a pot of money here that you work with one of our grantees to produce some programming. And I know that there's enough talent in this community to do that. Maybe we can't do soap operas, but I'll tell you the truth, we probably could do that if we chose to. But we could work with one of the grantees to provide some really outstanding programming. And I'm like Isla. When I first got involved with it, I thought all we had to do is go out and find it and buy it. And when I found out that it isn't that easy, that maybe we had to do it ourselves. But I really think we need to do that. But I don't know where it is. But I think we need to do this over a long period of time. I just don't think any of us or the grantees are ready to have some really vital changes in this next year. It's hard for people to see, the future in 5 years or 3 years or 4 years. I don't know. What do you think, Jen? You're good at this.
Actually, I just have a couple of comments regarding unmet needs and ascertainment. As broadcasters, KVIA has requirements. to do ascertainment of the community. And we're very diligent about doing that, and we would be more than happy to provide you with that information on a regular basis. It really does survey the community at large in Sacramento specifically, and it's just information that might be helpful to you. As far as this kind of creative approach to allocation of funding and the grants, I think it's an absolutely wonderful idea, and yes, there's enormous talent in the community in terms of being able to provide you some of that kind of programming that you may determine is needed. And I also agree that we ought to make this a stepped process rather than a dramatic change. And I think what you're hearing from the grantees is some of that concern about making a wholesale change.
Making what?
Making a wholesale change, a radical change from what we've been doing currently to 0 to 100%. And so making a stepped change, I think, is a very reasonable approach, and I think you find a lot of agreement in that.
One of the elements that has puzzled me is how you're able to operate without having a stated goal.
Well,
and how you can operate without having milestones to achieve that goal.
Well, Mr. Fletcher, that would mystify me as well. In our plans that we submit to this commission, which is quite a lengthy document, we very specifically establish goals and provide detailed budgets and report exactly how our
no difficulty for you, was it? It was
absolutely no difficulty whatsoever.
See, that's why I'm puzzled why we're spending so much time on this, because I can't conceive of how you could move forward without having a goal for a specific kind of programming and milestones to achieve it. And this is a very simple process, isn't it, Jan?
I agree with you entirely, and I will tell you, Mr. Fletcher,
but they're doing it, not us.
All of you. If you look out in this audience as we've just been hearing this conversation, you will see a lot of puzzled looks, because I know that we all feel, and I will just speak for myself, we go to great lengths to provide reporting to you. We are absolutely accountable for the funds that we received, what we've done with them, and what we've accomplished with those funds. And when we hear, sitting in this meeting, that we have not been accountable, we have a problem with that, and we can't make the distinction between what we've been doing and what we're being asked to be accountable for, because we think we've done a very good job of being accountable. And that's where you're seeing the concern. Of course, we want to develop goals and plans, and that's what we believe we have been doing. If there's a different format or a more consistent format that you would like to see those in, you're not going to find a problem with that with any of us.
That's what this is designed to do, is to move us forward, so those who do the analyzing have some bases that are common for the analysis and some kind of paperwork which demonstrates that.
And have the paperwork that we've been providing over the past years, do you see some dramatic change in the way that reporting is done?
No, what I see is a very progressive change, that we're all becoming more refined in the process. We're more able to express with definition that which we wish to accomplish among the grantees. And there's some very fine materials that have come in to back up my statement. Now, we're talking about next year, and we're talking about a process where we have to make some decisions which show with a greater definition how funds are going to be used and how you hope to achieve that goal. And I don't see it as a big problem. And it's all invented by the grantee. We don't originate it. We don't tell you what program specifically to put on, but we do analyze it to see if your goal and your milestones go together, that they mesh, and that they produce a result which justifies the $20,000 or whatever it is we're talking about.
Okay.
Now, Ron Cooper, you're going to be next here, but I just want to ask the commission members, how long are you willing to stay today? What, you have other obligations. I never in the world expected this to take this kind of time.
I just want to find out what the expectations are, because I thought we were going to have a series of workshops. And so I thought if we don't finish today, we can do it next month.
That's what I thought.
Well,
and so we don't have to get through all of these.
Ron, you were first, then we'll take Mike.
I'll defer to Mike.
You have an hour you have to leave, though.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Michael Hayward, and I had been elected to speak on behalf of all the grantees But we were facing a dilemma in the structure of the agenda, frankly. It never occurred to us that we would be spending all the time on item number 1A, because it was my understanding that at the conclusion of last month's meeting, what you told us to do was to get together with staff and see if we can arrive at some concepts, some guidelines that Commissioner Collins has been seeking. This has never taken place, you see. We've not gotten together with the staff. We've not been invited to submit any items for the agenda. So we're kind of left out in the cold again, and it's a we and they situation, which we would like very much to convert into a we all together. Because we had to respond to this agenda, the letter that we drafted together at some pain reached you only yesterday. And I totally agree with you, Mr. Chairman. We couldn't dream of expecting you to respond today to any of those items. What we thought was that we would have enough time to go through that letter and begin to get at some of the concepts that we, the nonprofit program organizations, would like to throw into the mix. And I guess we'll have to wait until next month to do that.
We have the time. I wish to respond in the one respect. See, originally we were going to have roundtables first, then bring the common remarks to the commission. That was changed last time by the commission consensus that we wished first to enter into the financial aspects of it, which we have started today, and then we would have roundtables. Now, it seems to me we're at a time of day where we need to pull this together and to say, well, we're going to meet again next month, Cable Commission, with you folks present, in between discussion, so on, between grantees and our representative, and see where it takes us. What do you, as members of the commission, want to say about this?
Rich, was it your understanding that you were to meet with the grantees before today and come to this meeting with some kind of agreed upon?
I reviewed the tape last meeting, talked about it at length. There was clearly confusion, but there was no clear direction other than the action the commission took to resume monthly meetings and have this discussion today. There was no discussion. It went around of asking for comments back on the draft contract of meeting. It was sit tight until the commission gives staff direction on how it wishes to proceed.
Let me ask a question. One of the, I know that one of the things that probably is frustrating is that there's a different approach, I think, that the grantees would like to see us have on the table today. And I assume it's F in the letter about new agreements, and which are some ideas that we do need to discuss, and we need to discuss them in the context of the type of discussion that we're having today. There's also another very important item in that I might term it differently. How can reliable funding be reinstituted for community programming? But I was thinking of it more just by reading the title. I was thinking, how can it be assured into the future when we don't have a magic, a magic ball to see into the future? But when I look at that F that you have submitted, it's well worth discussion. It ought to be on the agenda at the same time that we're discussing some of these other ideas, so that we have a multiplicity of ideas to discuss. And how we do that and when our next meeting is something we should work on. And it is difficult, I think, for the grantees to be meeting with staff when staff doesn't have any really clear policy direction from us. I think he got some direction today, both Brent and Rich did, about where commission members feel comfortable in terms of where they want to go, but we haven't begun to explore all of the different issues that could be involved in a contract. And until we do that, it's really difficult, I think, for staff to sit down. You all might spend a lot of time. That's what I was afraid of, that from last meeting until September, there might have been a whole bunch of meetings going on, and then everything would have exploded in September anyway. September, it's now October. But to me, the dates are not as important as the fact that we get over a lot of these, give some policy directions, and have some clear direction where we want to go in the next few years. But the bottom line all of us have to work on is how you secure funding in the long run for any type of cable programming.
Yes. One thing I can add, I want to reiterate or reconfirm what Isla just said, and that is that I think it's important that we find a way to develop jointly, perhaps, an agenda for the next meeting so that we have an opportunity to get the concerns kind of out and before you. And maybe what you might want to do is, and Orville, this is up to you in your discretion as chair, is maybe have in advance of the sending of the agenda, maybe confer with a representative of the nonprofits to maybe try to work out jointly an agenda that gets at least on the table those things that we're talking about.
Now, you see, I think that's legitimate. I think there has to be a way, other than coming at the end of the agenda as people who want to be heard on items not posted, to have some input. We certainly, at all of our governing board levels, receive communications and receive requests to have things on the agenda. And the chair has to work, I think, with staff and to figure out which are the best things to put on the agenda, what will we be able to cover in that next meeting. So I don't have any problem with that.
Yes, go ahead, please.
For SECC, I would ask that you also very seriously consider some interim kinds of meeting between Rich and us so that we can begin to hammer out these kinds of things that are being misunderstood today.
If we have made enough progress this day for this meeting to have been worthwhile, it has not moved perhaps as some of us thought, and I have your green sheets. I hope it does not leave you with great frustration, but to say that we pick these up when we next meet, and there will be full opportunity to speak. But you must have a certain sense of satisfaction that we have made progress in talking about concepts and that we can move ahead with some kind of discussion with the individual grantees between now and the next meeting. It's obvious that because of the time element that we're going to have to close before we give adequate consideration to item number 1B. And at this moment, I'm going to ask the commission members if you would permit this meeting to be extended to open again on November 5, either in the morning or the afternoon. That would be the first Thursday in November. The number of persons who can be present morning or afternoon is almost the same. 6 in the morning, 5 in the afternoon on November 5. Now, I've said a lot in what I've posted here before you, but it is the idea that we would continue this discussion, that it would next occur on November 5.
I would like to respond, though, to the speaker that as far as the policy items that the board has already given some direction on, if there is a willingness to talk about those with Rich, where there's been a policy already, you've heard the discussion today. I don't have a problem with Rich meeting on that with the grantees, nor do I have a problem if you want to explore some of what does the other language mean between now and our next meeting.
I agree with you, Isla. I think that ought to take place. I think that maybe Rich ought to meet with the grantees in the next week and produce an agenda jointly with them so that we can have a productive meeting come November.
Well, also inherent in this, there's no harm in trying this contract with some of the grantees, finding out where the hitches are, if there be such, or if they can be worked out. The element that is necessary is for a given grantee and our representative to meet and begin the process of seeing how the contract works.
Let's focus, though, on what I hear from today's meeting. What I heard from today's meeting, I'll be sure I'm getting some kind of a consensus, because we didn't get it last time. The Commission is interested in, or will consider, a bifurcated approach wherein there is some entitlement, some base funding, and also some grant funding, some funding that is optional or discretionary in its structure as a first-year transition to whatever we decide happens 3 or 4 years out. Is that an accurate summary?
That's good.
Okay. The question that needs to be answered then is what percentage? How much?
We don't know. But we have no idea yet.
We don't need to know that as long as we know that you want to do both performance funding and entitlement funding, and we can work with them on that.
But I think it's pretty obvious from up here that everyone's uncomfortable if it's very. I mean, they just want to try the performance. So if you came in here and said 50-50, the commission would probably say, no, you can't do that. That's not going to work.
Seriously, I was thinking 80-20.
Yeah, that's a max.
I was thinking 70-30.
Oh, you weren't even here.
I was thinking
I heard 2 80-20s and 1 70-30 and one.
I would say 80-20 is max. You might even want to do less than that the first year because there's so little money that we're talking about, and you've got a lot of.
You'd be talking about $100,000. At a 90-10.
90-10 is 100,000. 10% of your $1 million for these grantees is $100,000. So 20% is 200,000.
That would be 100% would be absolute max.
Back to 90-10.
Yeah, 90-10 is max.
100,000.
The other thing I would request that we've heard references to, but this goes back to the original plan. If there are specific comments on the grant agreement, much of that is boilerplate that existed already. Staff would love to see specific comments rather than it just doesn't work, we don't like it. Come back with alternative language. Again, this is the way that the customer service regs were negotiated, the disclosure was negotiated, we just completed working with SAC Cable the work order. Here's the draft, here's the response, something specific that we can then look at. If the insurance requirements are off base, show us where they are, let us look at it. But just that it's off base, it's too hard.
Well, I'd like to direct staff to work with the grantees in the next 2 weeks to do exactly that.
How about directing the grantees to respond?
Exactly. Thank you.
We'll do that. We know they will. You will.
It takes two to tango.
Got it. No
We're going to tango in the next 2 weeks.
I just had one quick question, and Greg's right here, so that the letter which Mr. Powell has addressed to us talking about relating to grant considerations. It was we just got it.
Yes.
Oh, the one on First Amendment?
Yeah, and could we just, actually it's very complex. And I
review it next time.
Yeah, and that's just exactly what I was going to ask. Could we ask staff to review this, and probably the two of you should meet on this. It's very complex. Greg has given you
I don't know that we'd agree, but I certainly don't have any problem meeting with Craig. He's a very nice gentleman.
That's true.
Do you want any kind of response to that? I mean, is that going to be helpful to you?
Well, I think we have to have a response to this.
I think a response would be helpful.
I'll find some way to enjoy Mr. Powell's company within the next couple of weeks, and then we'll give you a response.
Make him buy lunch, Craig.
That's what I was. That was absolutely the concept, Director.
You came forward to agree to that.
I think what we need to do is perhaps hold our horses a little bit on signing off, on giving any sort of direction to staff on this issue of a base level funding versus a discretionary grant funding. There are very serious issues that we haven't even begun to talk about on this that we're going to be brought forward by the grantees at the next session. What I think is a very good idea is to direct staff and the grantees to get together on those first few items that you've reached consensus on, but we could now go back and review the specific language and work it out, and we could dual track it in that way. We can make progress on the policy issues that have been mutually agreed upon, but on these major issues like funding and whether we do a two-part system, that I think we must wait till next time.
Well, I didn't expect there'd be any final to it unless there is over the insurance language, et cetera. You might reach on things like that. But, on the programming and changing, et cetera, I can understand where there still might be a lot of things that need to be said at the next meeting.
We need a decision on the next meeting. If you understand, because it's election week, the City Council has moved its meeting on top of ours on Thursday, the 5th of November. The decision for you is whether to meet and not have city representatives in the afternoon or whether to meet in the morning, and some of you have schedule conflicts, and that's what's before you that the chair was describing.
And what's a different date we could meet then?
It's the same.
I know we need to see.
No, I think we need both city and county representation here because otherwise it's Jim by himself.
You have some. It isn't just, but if you look at the schedule, you can see what your schedules are for the morning.
No, but we can look at the schedule and we can notice that if we don't meet in the afternoon, then you've only got one member of the Board of Supervisors here. If we meet if we meet in the morning, that's when the soups are gone, except for
But
jam.
not
If we
all
meet
of
in
you,
the
though.
afternoon, we miss Cerna and we miss Castanis. And Cerna misses both of them.
Right.
So the issue comes down to, Lynn said she might miss both of them.
No, Grantland would be in the morning.
I said I can't meet in the morning, but I'll try to
that's
change
true.
whatever it is.
Yeah, those are the best options right now to clear your
November
calendars.
5th is a set-a-day, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, if the
so.
meeting could be at 10:30 instead of 9:30, then we could usually be here by 10:30, Toby.
Right.
If we could start at 10:30, that would be the greatest feature. We're losing time getting started
Yes,
to the
we did
point
today, I'm
where
sorry.
it is difficult to have enough time for deliberation.
I know.
Okay,
Well, and I would move that we continue this item to November 5th at 10:30 a.m.
Is there a second?
Yes.
It has been moved and seconded that the meeting be continued to November 5th, 10:30 a.m. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. It is carried.
Is that here or city council?
Here.
Here.
Yeah, here.
Okay.
City Council will be setting up for their meeting.
So we'll be in this room.
That's correct.
Okay, and those of you who did not speak today, we'll give you double time at double prices next time. How's that? Thank you very much for your patience, and we'll see you next month.
I know. Signed the legislation on the day, right?
I took that.